So welcome. We start something new tonight. We haven't done this before in the long history of the Integral Knowledge Study Center, but we're going to begin at the beginning with Indian wisdom by commencing a study of the Vedas. We intend that just to be a beginning, because over the coming months we're going to move from the Vedas into the Upanishads, from the Upanishads into the Gita, from the Gita into a study of the Vedantic streams of knowledge. We'll look after that at the Tantra, the Siddha tradition, Hatha Yoga that follows them all, in order to form a background. I want you to know what India has accomplished, how wide and deep and high it is. And then you'll have a context when we begin studying Sri Aurobindo's magnum opus, The Life Divine, to appreciate it more. I know many of you have perhaps studied Indian philosophy on your own. You may have gleaned insights from Western philosophy, which will be useful in this study too. But some of you have had no advantage like that. Have never had a chance to look at the entirety of the Indian spiritual tradition, so we're going to take our Sundays for the next few months and dedicate them to that. Now, we haven't done it before because we wanted Sundays to be oriented towards practice. Here we're going to be speaking a lot about thought and insight. Well, if I may offer a defense, all of Sri Aurobindo's 1,000 pages in The Life Divine, which we regard as supreme philosophy, is based upon his experience and practice. And so let us make the thought, the krita, that comes from our work together an appropriate offering as we aspire to turn these Sundays into something that is useful to us. Now, the Vedas from the verb vid, to know, are immemorial. We don't know how old the Vedas are. But I can tell you that when I studied classical Sanskrit, which was itself challenging, and went to the Veda, it was like learning a new language. If you had to compare modern English with Old English, which is 1,000 years ago, you approach the difference between ancient Sanskrit and modern Sanskrit. We now know through phylogenetics that the language of Indo-European, which gave birth to Sanskrit, could well be 9,000 years old, and originated in Anatolia and moved from there in various directions. Obviously, it became Indo-Aryan when it came to our subcontinent of India, and some of the Veda no doubt originated in India itself. Other parts of the Veda may have originated in Anatolia, its first home, because the Hittites, it seems, worshipped gods familiar to the Indian pantheon, like Indra, Mitra, Varuna. We won't subscribe to the modernistic theory that the Indo-Europeans, when they came to India, were bent on conquering and subjugating the peoples of India. The evidence that is gathering over these last decades seems to indicate that they were peaceful, that it was a migration, an immigration, not a conquest that brought them to India. And their first home was in the area of the Kurus in northern India around Punjab. Later, they branched out and moved towards the east, towards the Gangetic Plain. And all this time, the literature, which we call Vedic, was growing. This body of knowledge, because remember, Veda means knowledge, is the oldest spiritual literature in the world. It is remarkable in the beauty of its lyricism. There are many, many meters which are sacred to the chants of the Veda, but they're all beautiful. And in the Indian mind, and probably in the Indo-European mind, the rhythms of the words brought the world into being. And in fact, I think we need to talk a bit about the cosmology of this ancient people, because the way that they perceived the universe is critically important to understanding what they aimed at in their lives. Because the world was alive to them. It had a birth, though. Out of apparent darkness, a dividing line emerges and cuts the darkness in two, and then there is light. And from this luminous being, consciousness comes into the world. This pregnant darkness, which gives way to light, is figured in many myths. But let's take a straightforward exposition of what we think the mythology of the Veda was trying to tell us. That out of a supreme mother goddess, one who was infinite, Aditi, there came into being a number of great, powerful entities. Her children. This set of children, the old ones, the old powerful gods, were called the Asuras. And following their own course into action in the nascent universe, they took crooked ways, and the Mother Goddess sent forth a new stream of deities, whom we call the Devas, the shining ones, the gods, to come and restore order and to face down these nether powers and subdue them so that a world could come into being and sustain itself in harmony. There is a great battle in the sky. These Asuric forces have taken all the waters of creation and bottled them up in clouds. They won't let them out. So, as long as that water, which represents creative energy, cannot move, is made to be still, then nothing can grow. So among these shining hosts, the strongest, the bravest, is Indra. Indra wields the thunderbolt. And all the gods turn to him and say, Indra, strike Vritra with your thunderbolt. But Indra is looking at the enormity of this being, and he has some doubts. And so they bring to him a divine drink, the soma, which, like a golden honey, he quaffs, and then filled with inspiration and courage, he lifts his thunderbolt and charges at Vritra and throws it, and Vritra, turning to see this javelin headed at him, is pierced, penetrated, and rolls over on his back. All the waters from this great cloud bank are released, and they flow to the earth, and everything begins to grow. And Vritra sinks, 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 down and down and down, until he is not visible anymore. He becomes as if non-existent, but he lies at the base of creation. He is there. And the Asuras have not been finally defeated, but they've been subdued, they've been jujitsued, and now the gods take over, the Devas, and they begin to construct a universe out of apparent disorder into obvious concord. And there's a world, Prithvi, who stands at the base of things. This world, though, is made to come alive. Force of life enters into it. Not only is the world alive, but it can begin to think. And in the worlds above this triplicity, which we know intimately, thought and life and body, are other worlds, which are known to the Vedic seers. And they sing about these worlds. And they sing about how we can reach them and how we can work in amity and concord with the gods and put away from us the darkness of the Asura, not fall victim to their sway, not take their bait, not to be seduced by them, but always to be positive, always to be growing, always to be noble in spirit. And that is the picture of the Aryan. Arya is a word which means noble, civilized, one who is winging upward. That's the original meaning. And these Vedic peoples called themselves the Aryans. They took this symbol of this harmony of the gods above and felt that to make that real upon earth, they had to establish that cosmic order in themselves. So their society should look like those heavenly celestial beings. There should be a divinely inspired leader. There should be a center to the society. There should be knowledge and strength and prosperity and service. And all the four orders of society are drawn from the analogies with the gods. But to the Vedic people, this was not analogical thinking. They created rituals which were made real in sacrifices, yajnas, which brought the gods into play on the earth. In fact, they felt that if the sacrifice is left undone, then the world doesn't exist. So what that means is that human life is central to the play of the cosmos. It is meaningful. If we don't do our job, the world collapses. And what we want to do is continually to grow. So this sacrifice, which institutes the rule of the gods, is critically important to Vedic life. And there were two general kinds of sacrifice. There was one that you did at home every day. And in the morning at sunrise and in the evening at sunset, you would light the fire. And into the fire, you would pour milk and water blended together, and it would steam upwards. Milk representing what is derived from your day. This is the result of your life, and you offer it. And you blend it with water because water purifies. And you offer it in the morning and you offer it in the evening. But there were also public sacrifices, the Shrauta, where large numbers of people would gather. And there, the head of the household wouldn't be enough to conduct the greater ritual. And in this sacrifice, you would have 4 orders of the priesthood. You would have the Hota, who would call upon the gods to come, visit us, be part of our lives. You would have Varyu, who was the master of the journey, because the idea is that the sacrifice moves. It's a pilgrimage. It's moving from here to there. And so he would be there to take charge of the actual doing of things. There'd be the Udgat, there would be the priest who sings the hymn, who gives voice to it, gives rhythm to it, gives tonality to it. And upon that cascade of music, the gods can descend. And finally, the last priest would be the Brahman, who would be silent throughout the proceedings. But if anything went awry, he would note it and correct it. And then at the end, when everything was perfect, he would say, Om, and the sacrifice would be complete. what would we sacrifice? Well, we would sacrifice all that we are. And let us see how symbolic this can be. The idea that what we would glean from our lives would be represented by what today we call ghee, and what in ancient Sanskrit was called grita. It would be milk made into butter, butter heated until you remove all the sediments, and what you have left is this golden, clear, perfect oil, which looks like it came from another world. And it represents your best insight, the sap of everything that you've done. When you've gone through the day and you've sat and you've thought about what you've accomplished, and you said, this isn't mine, it really belongs to that, then you have grita, and you take it and you pour it on the sacred fire which carries it upwards. And that gives me a chance to talk about who are these gods that receive the sacrifice. The sacrifice might be this grita, it might be grain, it might take larger forms, it may take the form of a living being, but whatever it is, it's always symbolic. The journey is going from here to there, and who accompanies us? First and foremost is the sacred fire, Agni, akin to ignis in Latin. Agni is filled with light, filled with joy, filled with energy. He is will force. He is moving, and he consumes, but as he consumes, he purifies. As he purifies, he enjoys. And Agni seems to be of this earth. He is the one that is born again and again and again. But the Vedic mystics could see that this fire has a higher home. This fire is also present in the bolt of lightning. He's alive in Vidyut, electricity. This Agni is alive at the center of the sun. The solar world is all afire. And connecting us from that supreme solar light through the regions of the air where lightning dwells, down here to earth. Agni is everywhere. Agni is Vaishvanara. He's the universal Godhead. He dwells in all things equally. And because he does, he is Jata Veda, the knower of the ways. He knows all the paths, all the routes. So whatever it is that we bring to him to offer, he knows how to receive it. And he knows how to rise. He uses the powers of vitality, the Ashwins. He uses the power of compassion and harmony and amity in our lives, Mitra. He uses the oceanic power of Varuna to carry in swelling form, higher and higher, this offering from the Yajamana, from the one who gives. And who is this Agni but ourselves? He is universal. He dwells in us as well. We also are a formation of his fiery force. That will is active in our life. That will is active in our mind stuff. And it is natural for us to ascend and always be on the go, rising and rising, back to that solar home. Because we go from plane to plane. We rise to live in the immortal spheres of life. We rise beyond that to the level of the divine mind, where Indra is king and lord. but we leave Indra at some point too, and rise to that solar world, Surya, who has many names, but who relies upon the wideness of Varuna, the concord of Mitra, universality of Aryaman, the delight of Magha, to instill in us its greatest treasure, the divine splendor. So the Vedic mystic thinks that we can get there. But how do we ride there? The sacrifice is an element of it, but what accompanies the sacrifice? It is this hymn, this rik, this powerful word. And the rik has within it the divine potency. It is the mantra. The first time we ever hear the word Brahman is an association with the mantra, that which grows. If you take these powerful words and you make them come alive in you, then they vibrate and release the kindred part in you, which is that which is in the word. And in unison, you grow. The mantra awakens you, makes what is potential in you actual, and carries you upward. So the mantras are formed into riks, the verses. And the verses are carved out of the heart of the seer, of the rishi, of the poet, the kavi. This kavi, this rishi, is not one who is abstract from life. He is not somebody who is on the outside of society, but has lived fully and has gathered to himself great wisdom, may have gathered enjoyment, may have gathered wealth, but he has arrived at this vision of the universe, which is deep, penetrating. He has imparted into his poetry a hidden dimension. There is the outside, the surface meaning of these hymns, which the common laity will know, and it is effective for them. But for one who wants to go deeper and gain initiation into the mystery, then the Vedas reveal themselves to have an interior dimension. That what seems to be said on the outside is just the beginning. The sun that we worship, sure, it pours down rays on us, we get tan, it makes flowers bloom, but the inner sun is the one that we really want. That's the one that gives us immortality. That's the one that reveals to us the nature of ourselves. The cow that we treasure, certainly the bovine creature is a thing of beauty in India, more graceful than I have to say the cattle of other countries. But what go really represents is not simply the beast, but light. Look at a sunrise coming over a hill sometime in India, where these white cows are streaming into a pasture, and they look verily like rays of light. You can see why they come to symbolize light. This word go, G-A-U, means both things, cow, gau, and light in ancient Sanskrit. So like this, there is a play intended in the poetry of the rishi, of the kavi. If you know how to read it, you get the inner meaning. Or if you have shown your wherewithal, if you've shown that you're worthy, you can gain initiation directly from the teacher into the mystic doctrine. no doubt see the comparison here between the mysticism of ancient India and the mysticism of ancient Greece. The Eleusinian mysteries are lost to us in Greece. We have no idea, the barest record of what they might have been like. But in India, we have the Rig Veda. We're grateful to have it. So these various elements, the seer of the mantra, the sacrifice that accompanies the citation of the mantra, the pouring of the ghee, the offering on the fire that carries us upwards with the offering until we live in a felt divine communion with those gods and goddesses. And then, what do we have? Here on earth, we aim to live 100 winters, nothing less. Reveling in the rapture is the way Sri Aurobindo translates that telling verse. About Sri Aurobindo, you'll remember, if you know something about his biography, that he attained nirvanic enlightenment around 1908 in a sudden descent into meditation. He gained a view upon the world which revealed it to be divine about a year later. But he never stopped his sadhana with either of these grand realizations that the universe is divine or of that which is behind the universe as being divine. They fused in him. But when he was about to be arrested by the British in 1910, he got word from Sister Nivedita that was about to happen, and he followed an interdictum that said, go to Chandrinagar. He spent some time there, at least a month, and then he went down to Pondicherry on the advice of that Adesh. But while he was in Chandrinagar, his host noticed that he was sitting for hours in front of a wall. Now here's a man who has become oceanic in being, who is living in the infinite, consciously. And when questioned about why he's looking at the wall, he says, I see things playing out before me. Later, when he got to Pondicherry, he had his first opportunity to read the Rig Veda. He had learned Sanskrit, taught himself Sanskrit, but had never held a copy of the Veda in his hand. And when he began to read the hymns from the 10 mandalas of the Veda, he saw that what he had been experiencing in Chandrinagar, which was continuing in him even then, were scenarios depicting the actions of these gods and these old riks, that they were still powerful, that they represented something actual, some commerce that goes on unseen between us and the divine above, that afflatus that the Vedic rishis wrote about, being able to descend into us and change us, was still possible. Whatever you call them, those conscious entities lean into our lives. So, whatever names they may have, whatever forms are friendly to us, that we can live in communion with what is superconscient to us, and that can become normal in our lives, is the takeaway from this. The insight is that all of our life is a wonderful opportunity for enjoyment, but we should live a disciplined life. We should be focused. We should be concentrated. And whatever we experience is not ours. We offer it. And the more consciously we can place this in the lap of the divine, the more blessed we are. And the more the blessing that is upon us is shared with the wide commonality around. All the community, all the earth is gladdened if we live in concert with the divine. That cosmology becomes real, becomes substantial, becomes material. The Vedists were not merely mystics having an indrawn life. No, they meant for all the divine blessings to be felt here in matter, to live in our emotions, to clarify our thoughts. So, I had the idea of going through some of the Vedas with you, verse by verse, but I see that I've eaten up quite a bit of time already tonight, so I think we will enjoy some of the mantras next time, next Sunday night when we gather. And if you have questions or comments, we can hear those now. Yes.
Going back to the Asuras lying, at the foot of creation, and yet affecting us possibly by tempting or seducing us into a lower form of growth or state of no growth or backwards growth. How are they able to do that when they were more or less, the shining beings? In the myth, how do they get past the light to bring the darkness?
Well, they aren't destroyed, they're simply subdued. Just like when a victorious army defeats another, its people aren't completely annihilated. The government changes. They continue to
influence.
Yes, to try to come back and to assert themselves. We can see all of this playing out in modern life, can't we? By the way, I was going to tell you a joke this evening. There are two competing, well, why just two? There are lots of competing theories about where the Aryans came from, the Indo-Europeans who came to India. And one of the ideas strongly held is that they came from what we call Ukraine today. But in fact, the best data that we have right now is that it's even older and from Anatolia that this immigration arose. 2,500, 3,000 years older than the other model portrays. And much more peacefully, which reconciles a lot of things, because India has always had a genius for accepting new arrivals, whether they're people or ideas. They've always received them and synthesized them. We can talk more about the questions around the sociology models, etc., another time. I don't want to bore you to death, but they have traced out the Y chromosome by haplotype and haplogroup, and the M130 gene or haplotype seems to be a first arrival in India before it went everywhere else out of Africa. And maybe India really is Mother India, because there in South India, is where its home is. And the Indo-Europeans, when they came, met these original inhabitants of India. Over millenniums, they have become one country, Bharata.
For those of us who may not know where Anatolia is, can you please give us an idea where that is in modern geography?
I can show you. Madan, can you explain?
Well, I think that's an ancient name for Turkey.
It's exactly
Oh,
correct. It's exactly correct. It's also interesting that from a part of what is now Turkey came Alexander the Great, who, in penetrating Indian territory, introduced the idea of history to India. Historical records were not kept until the Greeks got there, but they liked to keep records, and infected the Indian consciousness with that. So, thank you, Madan. Madan, now you must just be filled with questions. I know you.
Well, you know, I read a book a few years ago, the title of which is The Real Eve,
Ah.
and that's by Stephen Oppenheimer.
Hmm.
And he says that all the non-African people in the world, which includes India, China, European countries, they came out of one group of people who left Africa, and they traveled the southern route because the northern route because the advancing ice age was closed,
Right.
and they reached India. That's his theory.
Hmm.
And so this one group of Africans which reached India, they multiplied there. So the rest of the humanity spread from that node, going to China, going to Central Asia, from Central Asia into Europe, and so on and so forth. So it is quite possible that the migration, which is often talked about, in the aliens coming from Anatolia or from the Arctic regions, at least according to this one author, it may perhaps be the other way around.
Exactly.
The migration was from India outward, not from outward into India.
Yeah. And I think he's absolutely right, and that's what I was referring to about that haplogroup M130. The scientific evidence on that is incontrovertible, and following the Y chromosome really will tell you who went where and how. And the paths of migration out of Africa are very intricate. And in a way, you can say that it's all true. All these various possibilities did happen to some extent, but what was the dominant theme? It wasn't one. There were waves and waves, moving this way and moving that way. The archaeological evidence and the linguistic evidence with the archaeological indicates that yes, there was a general movement eastward from Anatolia and into India, and those peoples stayed and were accommodated, assimilated, became what we know to be North India. The Vedic civilization was there first, and if the Vedas and the fourfold caste order became pan-Indian, in fact, it is because of that. It was not a racial thing, it was a cultural passing along. So, but that's, again, a matter for another evening, I think the thing to see is that many of the hymns of the Veda, which are the most inspiring, belong to the first and the 10th mandala. Those were composed in India. They are the latest, so we know that they arose in India. The earlier were more cryptic, more difficult to see what was going on, and maybe that's in part because we don't know the rituals that accompanied them. They've been lost to us. A lot of the rituals were not kept in the Shatatapa, Brahmana, etc., the Taittiriya, etc. So we don't have an idea about that now. Yes.
So, how did all this get recorded and handed down?
The Vedas, that's a great question. I'm surprised and ashamed that I didn't say it before now. But the Vedas have continuously been recited over the millenniums, not just the centuries,
So it's
but
oral.
over the millenniums. And there are still schools that you go to as a young boy, and you start learning the Veda, and you memorize it. There are ways that it's taught, mnemonic devices that are used, and you learn the whole of it. And that's why when you hear them reciting it, they do it very quickly, because boy, they're anxious to get it done. But it is an oral memory, which is unbroken for these, well, let's say 10,000 years. It's amazing. Now we know that Greek epics, the Iliad, the Odyssey, those were known and passed on generation to generation by mouth. That's also true of Czechoslovakian epics. And probably was true of all the world's old stories, that long before there was writing, you had to have a perfect memory. Now the Vedas have come down to us more or less uncorrupted. What we have of them, we have in the Rig Veda, the oldest of the four Vedas, 1,028 hymns. But the Veda speaks itself of how much has been lost. This is probably 10% of what originally was. There might have been even more in each of the Samhitas. So there's the Rig Veda, the oldest. There's the Yajur Veda, which is how you undertake the sacrifice. There's the Sama Veda, which is how you sing these things. They're more than just a couple of notes, and I think there are 5 notes in the Sama Veda, and it becomes quite melodious. You'd be surprised what you can do with 5 notes. And then there's a 4th Veda called the Atharva Veda. We'll be talking about that in a couple of weeks, which was not originally part of the 3, but was accepted over a period of time, and is quite substantially different from the Rig Veda and its cousins. So more about that later. Yes, David?
Isn't there some aspect of the language and the rhythm that kind of guarantees its accuracy? It's almost like encryption in some way, because if you hear it spoken variously throughout it, it's incredible how accurate it's been transmitted over the centuries.
That's right. There are various. There's the Anushtub, the Trishtub. There are all kinds of meters. In English, we would think of iambic pentameter. In Greek, we would think of dactylic hexameter, and it's da-da-da-da-da-da. You know, Rus, it's da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. That's an iambic pentameter. But in Sanskrit, they'll have many different rhythms to choose from with which a hymn will be constructed. And that's how you can learn it. It's always going to be that. Now, even so, there are a few places in the Vedas and even in the Upanishads where it seems that something got lost somewhere. A note was heard wrong, and then the error was repeated infinitely, up till this day. It's been repeated, and everybody's in disagreement about how you resolve that. But there are precious, precious few incidents like that. Imagine 1,028 hymns, and each one's roughly, on average, 10 verses long. That's a lot to remember.
And how old is the oldest copy that you know of?
Oh, written down?
Copy.
Written down, probably 1,000 years old, maybe, something like that. And how was it written? again, this is going to get into a lecture about linguistics. We'll just say that the script is called Devanagari, which means the city of the gods. In other words, the words of Sanskrit are gods and they dwell inside this script. But there were older scripts than Devanagari. And Sanskrit itself may never have been the spoken language of the people of India. Sanskrit means perfected. Prakrit means the language of the people. So they may have spoken Prakrit and then you derived Sanskrit from Prakrit languages and then made that orthodox. And everybody then wanted to be as perfect as Sanskrit was, and so you modeled your verb system, noun system after Sanskrit. That's traceable in the history of linguistics.
In terms of the commentary on the Vedas, Sri Aurobindo mentions Sion, and of course the Oxford Sanskrit scholars. Are there other commentators on the Vedas in addition to Sion, which has been
Oh yeah,
mentioned?
Yaska is probably the premier. And Sayana follows Yaska by hundreds, if not 1,000 years. So Yaska is Nirukta, is a great authority as well. I have to say that what I sent to you as possible links, you could go to the Dropbox account and pull things down. That's the Rafe Griffith translation, and it's a very imperfect translation. It is complete, but it's unreliable. Wilson before him was even worse. Nobody has done a complete translation of the Rig Veda since the 19th century. It's a lot of work. Louis Renou, the great French Indologist, was attempting to do it, but he passed away before he finished. It's very difficult language. To make a readable translation of it, tricky business again. I know a lot of people enjoy Panikar's translation and Vedic experience. That's one reason that I made that available to you. That he doesn't by any means do the whole of the Veda. And there are Upanishads and Yajur Veda extracts, etc. in there, but it's a book worth going through. He's pretty darn good as a translator. So I think we've had enough questions for tonight. Shall we go and sit for meditation then? Good then. And next week we'll continue in the Veda. Namaste. Jai Ma.